powerful episode of Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, where we explore the intersection of mental well being, personal growth, and the sustainable success. So, now, dear listeners, I want you to imagine this like you are a creative, an artist, a designer, or a storyteller filled with the ideas that light you up, right? So, you dive into your craft, but when it comes to running the business side, you are told to think like a CEO or follow the corporate playbook. And suddenly, the joy gets replaced with anxiety, self doubt, and kind of exhausting feeling that you are constantly doing it wrong, right? I guess a lot of you are nodding your heads, right? so, uh, so today's guest knows exactly why that happens, and more importantly, how to fix it. So I'm joined by Paul Pape. So welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Amazing, yeah. So, dear listeners, before we delve deep into the discussion, I'll quickly love to introduce you with Paul. So, Paul is a TEDx speaker, author, and the creative business strategist, affectionately known as Santa for Nerds. Yeah, you heard that. Yeah, yeah. So, like over the last 20 years, he has worked with giants like Disney, Universal, and Nickelodeon, uh, all while building his own thriving design studio. Yeah. So he's the creator of Gamify Business and the author of the Creative Player's Handbook to Business, a fresh, game based approach that turns intimidating business concepts into fun, creative adventures. Yeah. And his mission is to prove that creatives don't have to choose between um, making art and making money, and that business can feel like play and not the punishment. Yeah. So, we are going to explore how traditional business education actually damages the creative people's mental health and how to break free from the starving artist stereotype. So, how to turn your business into a sustainable quest that you actually want to play. So, I'll not take much of your time, dear listeners. Let's get started. Welcome to the show again.
Well, thank you again for having me here. Yeah, Santa for Nerds was actually a really fun beginning. I mean, I still am technically Santa for Nerds. So, um, and that what that came from is building thousands of custom pieces for people all over the world. For the last 20 years, and what that
Mm.
showed me was that there's a lot of people out there who are creative and who have great ideas. They just don't know how to go forward with it. And so I was there to as kind of like the person you would come to, and since I could make everything, they started calling me Santa, which was interesting. But within that, I ended up finding out that there's this disconnect between creativity and business. And I kind of look at myself as like I go through life. I say I mow my own path. I kind of do my own thing, and I always have, even when I was little. And so I was kind of blind to the statistics of creative people within the actual business world, like what happens when you have a creative based degree. And when I was writing these books, what I found out was 95% of people with a creative based background end up not pursuing creativity as a career because while they have the skills, they don't have the knowledge to do anything with it. They can be really creative, but they can't. The leap to get into actual business becomes more difficult for them. And then when we place them, so they basically leave creativity and they go find what we would call quote unquote a real job or a more linear type of career as opposed to the creative nebulous ideas of what they'd like to be doing in the first place. So, and what happens is they become stifled. They're forced to take this cloud-like imagination and force it into a box. And over time, it kind of kills the soul. And what we found is it leads to a lot of stress. It leads to a lot of burnout. It leads to them trying to lash out and find other ways of supplementing that joy that they used to have in the creative world. And so I was working with a couple of businesses. I was consulting with them, and this one that I was working with happened to be a creative based business. They were sculptors, and they made dragons, basically dragons and dragon themed things. And what I found was that they were doing really, really well and were successful when they were just hand sculpting it and doing it by themselves. But when they tried to move up in the corporate world to try and expand the business, try to reach more people, they were floundering. And so they were introduced to a businessman who said, "Oh, I know exactly what to do," and almost killed the business because those two ideals clashed. And so when they hired me, I was actually able to understand, because as a creative, I understood how they communicate. And in a day of working with them hands on, um, I had asked them, I said, well, what is everybody's role in the business? Because in the business world, we all have our titles. And they said, oh, we do everything. All of us do everything. I said, no, you can't do that in business. You can all have an opinion, but it's really hard for everyone to be the one in charge. You all have to have your specialty. And I said, why don't we try this? Why don't we try doing like a Dungeons and Dragons type of event? But instead of having a character like a warrior or a barbarian or a wizard, you are your specialty in business, be it the creative or the marketing person or whatnot. And we actually did a campaign, and that kind of gave me that spark of an idea that this is actually a better way to communicate business principles to those who don't think in the linear box, but instead think in more creative fashion. And that's where this business kind of came from.
Exactly. I mean, that's really great. I mean, I think a lot of creatives listening right now are realizing that their stress isn't about or from being bad at the business. It's um, from trying to play the wrong game. So um, definitely, yeah, definitely.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
I think that it's not necessarily that it's the wrong game, it's the wrong approach. I like to talk about rules. Business has a set of rules. Everybody, everywhere that we live within a set of rules. But who wrote those rules? And the answer usually comes down to somebody in a position of power who needed something to work a specific way for their specific situation at that specific time in the world. And what happens is, since that worked for them, they continue that set of rules down the line. But people are constantly switching out of jobs or aging out. And those same rules that were applied 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago don't apply the same way now. I remember being in school, and my teacher used to always tell me, you have to do all your math long form because you'll never carry a calculator in your pocket. And now I've got one on my wrist and in my pocket because we all have phones. So like the rules change. And so when I talk to business people, especially creative based business people, I say the rules that you're stuck on are arbitrary. We need to figure out what the rules are for your specific unique business. And then we cultivate your business around those set of rules. I mean, obviously, there are some that are hard and fast, but we can find a position in which it makes more sense to the creative mind, as opposed to saying, this is the rule, now let's bend you into that box. Let's instead have you, let's bend the rule a little bit and see what happens there.
Exactly. Yeah. And like you use gaming principles to help people build the businesses that feel fun instead of draining. So if you can share an example like where shifting a client's business into a quest mode completely changed their energy and the results.
So one of the first things that we do with any client that I have, or anybody who partakes in this, is we have to create what's called a character sheet. And that's very much a role-playing game type of an application. But the character sheet, the character that you're creating is you. I have found throughout all of my years is that a lot of people, especially solopreneurs or entrepreneurs, aren't willing to admit that they have flaws. But the reality is nobody is perfect, and we all have things that we excel at, and we have things that we're either we're good at it, but we don't like to do it, or we're just not great at it. And being able to create a character sheet in which you separate yourself, and so it's
Mhm.
no longer a personal attack. It's more of a, it's not I'm not great at this. It's my character is not great at this. And even though the character is a direct reflection, we can actually separate ourselves enough so that when we're looking at our character, we can say, oh, these are the flaws of that character. And flaws aren't necessarily a negative. They're just not the thing that you're the best at. But the reason we do that is because then once we're done with our character creation, which is your business and your business model and who you are as the entrepreneur or the person running that aspect of the business, then we go do something called looking for group, which in our role playing game is you would go to a tavern, which I know you guys can't see me, but I'm actually in a tavern here that we create called Gamify Business. And the tavern is where you meet other people. And what you do is you go and do an introduction. We call it a tavern invitation or your tavern introduction. And what that does is it lets you tell others what you're good at, who you are, and why you're there. It's exactly like an elevator pitch, but we don't want to use elevator pitch because that's a different language. And what I find is that when you're doing that, you're finding people who help to lift you up in the areas where you're deficient, and they're counter to what you're an expert in, and you form a really well-rounded group. And what that does is then it allows you to be more successful in business as opposed to being, uh, all thinking the same. The rule of thumb is you don't want 5 warriors in your group. You need a warrior, a healer, and a wizard to help round it out. And it's the same in business. You need somebody who's an extrovert, an introvert, someone who's good at marketing, somebody's good at ideation, so on and so forth. And so those game apps, once people understand that switch, they're like, oh, I get it now. The group that I'm building or the person that I'm building, the characteristics of those people aren't necessarily bad or good. They're a sliding scale of talent measurements that, and we call them skills, that allow us to understand, to create a whole picture as opposed to an individual person, and a picture there. So while you may be a solo adventurer, you still need occasionally somebody there to help round out your group.
Mm, great. And and like I love like your character sheet exercise. Like, uh, so how does this help creatives focus on their actual strength instead of getting stuck on a kind of perceived weakness?
So when we talk about strengths and weaknesses within gamify business, we don't. I don't know how familiar you and your audience are with role playing games, but typically when you're creating a character, you roll a lot of dice, and those dice tell you your stats. And the reality is unfortunately we can't roll a die to say, well, my strength is now a 16. We have what we have. So instead, what we do is is a sliding scale between two, not necessarily extremes, but two ideations there. And so what we say is, where do you fall on this spectrum? And then once they understand that, it's not one or the other. It's you're somewhere in the middle or leaning towards one side or the other. But then when we're looking for groups for other people, then we can look for the counter to that. And what that does is it allows people, when they're looking at their character or their selves, they can say, okay, I have, these are my strengths and my weaknesses, which are the part that we're not as
Mhm.
familiar with. But at the same time, we know that those are areas of growth. Also within the character sheet, we talk about things like your equipment or your education. These are your skills that the spells that you know. This information can always be built upon. And what's really nice about this framework is that we love getting the dopamine push when we're gaming, when we achieve something, when we level up or we get a new article of armor or a new weapon. But in business, we can do the exact same thing. We can level up our knowledge. We can level up the equipment that we have to work with. And all of that helps to boost us up. And thinking of it from a gaming point of view, especially as an individual, that allows us to get that dopamine kick and be more excited about progressing ourselves as rather than stagnating ourselves and just trying to work without a net, basically, or without any kind of idea of where to go.
True. Exactly true. Yeah. Okay. And like, do you find that the people are often surprised at the strengths that they have been undervaluing?
Absolutely. Uh, when we're doing character sheet, it's a little bit of therapy, I gotta admit.
Okay.
It's a lot of deep introspection, and
Hmm.
I'm currently working with a client who we were going through, and they were doing really well with the initial breakdown of their character, but then when they had to go in deeper,
Yeah.
they kind of they skimmed the surface of it. And when we sat down and discussed it, I said, no, we need to go deeper into this. And their concern was that, well, if I really kind of lay myself bare here, then, it makes me vulnerable. And I said,
Mm,
actually, it does the complete opposite. Instead of, well, first off, you're the only person who's going to see this sheet besides me as the coach. But when you can write down and actually verbalize or like put on paper what your skills, abilities, strengths, and weaknesses are, then it allows you to have a tangible representation rather than the warring ideas in our heads. Because as creatives, we've got a lot of voices and thoughts going on. And there's a lot of self-doubt and self-depreciation in there. But when we see it tangibly in front of us, then we can see that those are one, they always have more skills than they think they do. They always have a lot more depth than they give themselves credit. But any of the shortcomings that they feel that they have, they see that they are able to work on those, that it's not an impossibility to achieve better in those areas, but instead it allows them to see that it's possible because they've accomplished so much.
yeah. Mhm. I mean, that flips the usual self-help script. I mean, instead of forcing yourself into someone else's mold, you are starting from who you already are. So, that,
Correct.
that-
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a what is it Socrates or was Plato who said know thyself? And I believe it's 100% the truth when it
Mm,
comes to business, especially as an entrepreneur or a
mm,
solopreneur, because when we're working with businesses, the idea is that we can't sell to everyone. We would love to, but the reality is you and your product are not ideal for every single person. And so we want to concentrate on the things that make you unique within this world, especially when it comes to creative based businesses in a world of Amazons,
mm,
Walmarts, and these the ability to buy things for so cheap that
mhm,
handcrafted or specialty items, which would fetch a higher price, are often overlooked because the mentality is, oh, I could get it cheaper elsewhere. But you're missing that connection, that artist. And so I tell a lot of the creative businesses that I'm working with is to quit selling your stuff, start selling you, because you are the reason that people are buying what it is that
mhm.
you're selling. It's your individuality that really speaks to them,
True.
to the customer.
Very well said. Yeah, definitely. And like, so you have spoken about your rule of 100 philosophy. So how does that help creators build the sustainable relationship based businesses without falling into the hustle culture? What else?
Ah, yes. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. Social media has broken us as as humanity, on the basis that we need 1,000,000 likes to be successful. If my post doesn't reach 1,000,000 people or 100,000 people, then I'm not successful. And that's a lie. The reality is you need 100 fans. That's it.
Mm,
In the world of 8.3 billion people and the internet, you can find 100 people who like what
mm,
you like. Now those customers have to be, paying customers. As much as I would
mm,
love to say my mother is my biggest fan, she doesn't buy everything that I sell. So you need to find 100 people who are willing to put their money out there to support
mm,
you as an artist. And I think that once they recognize that 100 is an attainable goal, like 1,000,000 people, it's such an intangible number to so many people. Even 100,000 is an intangible number, but if you look at the return on ad spend or the return on investment of those tweets or Instagram posts or TikToks that you put out there, where people are getting 100,000, 1,000,000 likes, they're not transferring over into dollars. The people who are spending, like if you actually look at the return on those, the numbers are
mhm,
astronomically smaller. And so the goal is not to try and, like I said before, sell to everyone, but really market yourself and your product to the people who are really interested in it. And I think that once that switch, you see it in their eyes every time it actually sinks in, they get that aha moment, the light bulb goes off, and it's visible from outside, from me. I can see it in their eyes and in their faces. They go, oh, and it's such a burden to lift off their backs because they can get 100 likes. They can sell to 100 people. It's not that difficult. And obviously we can scale once you're more successful and those hundreds turn into thousands, but the initial idea is that really it's just 100 and 100 is attainable.
mm, exactly. Ooh. And do you think that the hustle culture hits creatives harder because it directly drains their creative energy?
One of the hardest things as an influencer or as a creative who's trying to put your business out on the social medias, anything like that, is content creation. And we feel as creatives, and I can speak as this because I am truly a creative, is that if I'm not creating something new every single time, I'm failing the mission. And the reality is that majority of your social media posts don't hit even all the followers that you have. And so posting the same thing repeatedly isn't necessarily a bad tactic. But that feeling that you're failing at being creative, it is absolutely draining on the psyche and on the mentality of the creatives that are there. And so it's there has to be that moment, that realization that occurs to you as a business or as an entrepreneur or just an artist who's trying to sell a painting, that the marker for success isn't within the social media, isn't within the hustle culture. If you stop for a second and become truer to yourself instead of trying to keep up with the rat race that's out there, you will be more successful. And I tell a lot of my clients that the reality is if you have the confidence in yourself, what you do, and you have that faith in your own like your own mind, you are true to yourself. When you walk into a room, you are almost like a superhero because that energy that you project is tangible. People will flock to you because there's a confidence, and that confidence is a mental attitude that you have to have. And
Mm,
creatives are awesome because to be creative in a world that doesn't really accept that. I mean, it's better in some parts of the world, but in the United States where I live, creativity it's a bottom barrel occupation. It's really difficult for like if you make the decision, I'm going to be an artist or a creative full time, you're already like got an albatross around your neck. It's hard. And so if you have the confidence to walk into a room and say, this is my life, this is who I am, and I'm comfortable with that, it radiates. And I think it's such a strong superpower that it really lends itself to this whole mentality. And I think it works and it kind of negates that need to have to constantly hustle in this culture that we have.
mm. Amazing. Yeah. Lovely. I mean, Paul, I would say you have actually shown us that business doesn't have to feel like a foreign language for the creatives, but it can feel like home. I mean, by aligning, definitely by aligning the strategy with the way creative minds actually think. Um, Definitely, like you have given people permission to stop fighting themselves and start building something which is sustainable, joyful, profitable. Yeah, definitely. And
Absolutely.
yeah, for the listeners, like if you have been feeling like you are bad at business, maybe the truth is you have just been playing someone else's game. So take a page from Paul's playbook, identify your strengths, design your own rules, and make the journey fun enough that you want to keep playing. So, Paul, like if someone wants to connect with you, what is the best medium?
The best way to find me is to go to gamifybusiness.com where you
Mhm.
can find all of this stuff, but you can also find me. If you send like a connect or an inquiry, it comes to me. I am not a business of 1,000. I'm a solopreneur. If you want to talk to Paul, you can get a hold of Paul. I'm also on all of the social medias, either under Gamify Business or under my other business, my Santa for Nerds business, which is Paul Pape Designs.
Perfect, perfect. So, dear listeners, I'll put all the links into the show notes for your easy reference. And for everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. And remember that the most successful game you will ever play is the one that you design for yourself. So, thank you so much.